As a student interested in becoming a teacher, I have decided to interview teachers at my current school, Elgin High. Many teachers have an inspiring story about how they became or how they were influenced to become teachers, but they also have stories that have impacted the way they teach their students. Today I am talking with Director of Bands Robert Sanchez about his story around the September 11th, 2001 attacks that changed our nation forever. His story that he has shared time and time again to teach just what being a student of music is all about. I first heard this story during marching band camp as Mr. Sanchez was beginning his first few weeks as a Elgin Maroon. His story connects to a very specific event, and as I am a historian of sorts, I feel that this story is a perfect one to inspire and influence other students. From my bandmates, classmates, and many others that will hear this, join me in my search for the stories of our educators, the ones that very well could shape your story.
So I was a sophomore in college on 9/11/2001. You were a gleam in your mother's eye. So I went to school in the University of Arizona in Tucson, but my family obviously being in New York, quite a distance there. My dad was working in downtown Manhattan at the time, so he actually he was there when all that was going on. He worked for Verizon, and then my mother's an elementary music teacher in a suburb, probably same relative distance we are in Elgin from Chicago. Same idea. And my routine at the time was to get into the practice room usually about 6:30 or 7 o'clock and play warm-ups and scales and that sort of thing on the clarinet, which is what I was studying. And then I would have a brass technique class at 8 o'clock. And so I did that, and I had this friend, his name's Johnny. He's actually a stand-up comedian now, so he very much had that personality when he was in college. And he knocks on the practice room door, and the practice rooms are in like a dungeon, essentially, like a little basement. And so you don't know what's going on. It's not, we didn't have smartphones then. Texting wasn't a thing yet. I had a cell phone, but probably didn't get reception down there. If you wanted access to information, in the same regard as you get it on your phone now, there were several computer stations throughout the School of Music with the old school color iMacs, if you remember those. So he comes down, he knocks on my practice room door, and he's like, "Did you hear? Planes crashed into the World Trade Center and into the Pentagon." So it's about 7:15 Pacific time. So it's it had already happened. It had just happened. So we're 3 hours behind, and so it had happened, the previous hour during the 6 o'clock hour for me. So I was probably asleep, rolled out of bed, probably had a CD on in my car, driving to school, and didn't know what was going on, and it hadn't really been widely broadcast yet. We didn't know that it was a terrorist attack at that point, especially after the first one hit. I think everybody just thought it was an accident, because a similar accident had happened with a much less significant plane had happened several years prior. And then obviously when the second plane and the Pentagon hit, I think we knew at that point what was going on. We think and talk about terrorism today in a much different way than we did back then. Back then it was something that you read about. It was something that was happening in other countries. The former Yugoslavia, that was a big area at that point where things were going on during the Clinton administration. But it wasn't something that was close to home. It wasn't something that we thought about. There weren't really, any racial tensions or cultural tensions related to that in this country. It just, there had been, Oklahoma City had happened. There had been the previous World Trade Center thing that had happened, but the Oklahoma City was obviously not any kind of religious situation, and you know, the first World Trade Center one was you know, was not really a lot of deaths related to that. So it wasn't a part of our lives like it is now. So when my friend knocked on the door, and you know, knowing that he was kind of a jokester and a prankster, I thought he was kidding. And most people that knew him probably would have, until I get to my class, you know, about 20 minutes later, and you know, in between, you know, finishing up my practice session and going to class, I went to one of the computer stations, and I was like, well, this guy's probably kidding, but I should probably check. And I couldn't get anything, you know, from CNN or anything like that. Websites were either down or they weren't updated with current information. It didn't happen as quickly as it does now. I mean, it happened pretty quickly, but you know, now it's within seconds. It used to be, you know, minutes and sometimes tens of minutes, if you can imagine that. But I get to class, and you know, being the New York kid, was the recipient of a lot of very concerned looks. And so at that point, I left the class and made a much more concerted effort to find some information. Tried to call home, and you know, all circuits are busy. That was what I got. So at this point, I'm starting to worry. College classes are 50 minutes typically if they meet 3 times a week. So the class got done about 10 minutes to 9 Pacific time. So it's almost noon now in New York. So everything has happened. Everybody knows it's a terrorist attack. The president is on Air Force One. You know, all that stuff that you read about in the news when they talk about the timeline and they show those things. I still at this point didn't know for sure that something had happened, but now it was to the point where there was definitely a concern because I couldn't get information.
Right.
I couldn't get through to the East Coast on you know, landlines, and I even tried calling my mother's work. Couldn't get through. I mean, everything was jammed. So a bunch of my classmates and I, we went to Dr. Bayless's office. He was a music ed director, and he had a TV in there, and that's where we watched it. That's where we watched the replays of everything, and you know, it was what you would think. It was absolutely horrifying, and more so for me, and I think everybody was you know, empathetic to that idea, that it was a little bit more difficult for me because I had grown up with, you know, with the Twin Towers, and that just being a part of the New York thing for me. So so we did that. I believe 9/11 was a Tuesday. I think it was a Tuesday. So we did that, and most of our rest of our classes were canceled. And interestingly enough, we had a musical score study class with a really old crotchety guy, and he had class, and we went. This was now 10 o'clock Pacific, and he somehow, I mean, he would stand there and regurgitate, put this in your score, put this in your score, this and that, and he started getting through things, but people just started leaving in the middle of it. And he was, you know, normally he would say something to you, but he was letting it go. So, and I still hadn't been in touch with my mother, so definitely it was something that I was thinking about. So I think I got a hold of my family sometime in the middle of the day. The rest of that day is kind of a blur. I remember there was some report of some, you know, some people protesting outside of a mosque, and there was like 2 sides, the Yay America and the Death to America side, and you know, I probably wanted to somehow be involved in that, but I didn't, and I don't really remember the rest of the day, but I do remember the next day, and this is where the band part comes in, and obviously the reason why I'm talking here. We had marching band practice. It's 250 people in the Pride of Arizona marching band, and I don't remember what we had planned initially for that weekend's game, but we did have a Saturday game, and it wasn't going to get canceled. There were some games on the East Coast canceled. Major League Baseball made changes to their schedule. NFL made changes to their schedule. but college was more of a regional effect, so our game was on the docket. And so our director, Jay Reese, who is now at Miami, but was at Arizona at the time, put together a patriotic show. We had already been playing America the Beautiful as part of our pregame show, so he incorporated that into our halftime show, along with God Bless America and Battle Hymn of the Republic. And we got to band that day, and it was one of those things. It was one of those days where everybody just came early because we were all still in a state of confusion and shock. And it's probably hard to imagine that, but I mean, really just people walking around like zombies everywhere you went. It was quiet. Normally you walk down the street, you don't make eye contact with people, but in this case, everybody would kind of acknowledge everybody, and it was an interesting day because it was probably, oddly enough, the most unified that I have probably seen, certainly the country, if not the world, in a single moment in time, to where everybody was sort of behind America and Americans as a whole. There weren't political distinctions and things going. I mean, you had George W. Bush, and he was our president, and he was a very popular president at the time too. People forget that, especially with how it kind of went later on. But and we looked to him and to sort of capture that moment, and he did. And I remember thinking to myself, it would have been nice to have Clinton, because Clinton was a good speaker, but that was really, it was only for that reason, and but the world and everything was so unified. So we get to band, and some guys went out and got the little candles with the paper things, and we had a little candle prayer, and then we learned our music for our show. And it's not the halftime show that was really the poignant moment. It was the pregame show. And what we did for this particular pregame show was we did our America the Beautiful. But what would normally happen is we would make, during America the Beautiful, we would make a shape of the globe. So we would play America the Beautiful, and we would make, with our 250 plus band members, essentially the outline of the USA, and then we would make the state of Arizona, and there would be a trumpet soloist towards the back end of the song that would stand where Tucson was. And what they did for this particular is they turned it into a trumpet quartet, and they had two people stand where New York was, one person stand where Washington D.C. was, and one person stand where in the Pennsylvania area. And so we did that, and then Ed Reed, the trumpet professor at Arizona, came out and proceeded to begin to play the national anthem as a solo trumpet. And this is kind of where it starts. Before that, they asked for a moment of silence, and the whole idea of moment of silence is being taken very seriously. The way that people react to the national anthem, the way that people react and respond to members of the armed forces, that really started then. I mean, when I was growing up, we had the Gulf War, and there was an element of it then, but not to the same respect or in the same way as during 9/11, because the feel around 9/11 was very much similar to, I would imagine, what it would have been like during the World Wars, where if you're a young man and then in that time young women as well, you're thinking, man, I might have to sign up here and go fight for my country. I mean, there was that feeling of responsibility. So there was a certain reverence to the moment of a moment of silence, and then 55,000 people absolutely pin drop silent. In a big outdoor stadium. I mean, it was a very profound moment for me, because here I am with my bandmates, and then in this stadium with fellow students, alumni, and all these people, and there was a mutual respect and understanding for that moment, which I think is really hard to define, but I guess the best thing I can say is it's in that moment everybody was feeling the same emotions and reacting the same way to them, and we had 4 or 5 days to sort of process that and understand what we were going through, and we knew at that point that it was these people that did this to us and that we were going to respond this way, and there were still a lot of people that hadn't been found and whatnot. So so out of that moment of silence comes the solo trumpet, and he's playing very lyrical, song-like style, and you can start to hear the murmur of the crowd singing along. It's almost like people were questioning whether or not they should initially, because it was such a solemn moment, but they started to, and it became like a chorus. When you go to a sporting event and people are singing the national anthem, it doesn't sound like, it was almost like it was rehearsed in a way. I mean, it wasn't clean and musical, but you could audibly understand what the crowd was saying, as they sung along with the trumpet soloist. And then the way that it was arranged is when you get to the big part at the end, "Oh, say does that Star Spangled," that was when the band would come in, and so the 250-piece band joined in with the trumpet soloist at that point and played it big and loud and proud. And so then you have that moment of USA, USA, and for me as a band person, even though that moment was, my involvement in it was as a band person, but it wasn't because of band that moment existed. But certainly I contributed to it as a band person, so I related to that as a way. So I think for me that is a very profound feeling and association I have to band, in particular marching band, just because of having lived that. And then I remember that we did a 1-year thing. There were a bunch of events. There's a picture that you can see. It was in Sports Illustrated, of a giant flag with people. I was in that flag, and it was designed by our professor at Arizona, and it was done at the local minor league baseball stadium. So a year later, we did a ceremony, and here I am thinking it's going to be this big emotional thing like that first one was, and it really wasn't. So you can't even generate moments like that. But for me, what I experienced was an extreme emotional reaction because of something I was doing with band, and so as a teacher, one of my goals is to try to generate emotional reaction by the students about their performance and get them to buy in and feel that way about it. Because I think if they do that, they're going to value it more, and it's going to be a better experience. And there was no competition in what we did in the college band, so it was really just about using it as a means to work with others and build skills and sort of develop your own self-worth in a way. So that kind of ties everything to the 9/11 thing there.
Right. So then what made you want to become a teacher in the first place then, to teach music?
Well, it's kind of the family business, at least on my mother's side. Education was always something of high value. Both of my grandparents on my mother's side, actually all my grandparents, all 4, have master's degrees, which is obviously very uncommon for somebody born in the 20s or 30s. So, and my grandmother was a physical education teacher, and then my mother became a music teacher. So it's something that I grew up around. She was primarily elementary, but did other levels too. So it's something that I grew up around, and it became a norm. And when you hear people complain about teaching, it rarely is what we're doing in the classroom that they're complaining about. It's more often than not a lot of the bureaucracy and all the other things that come with it. And I figured, well, I know all these things, and I know the good and the bad, and so I feel more comfortable maybe than the next guy saying I'd like to be a music teacher. Whereas a lot of folks, particularly I think with band, decide that they want to go in that direction because of maybe a profound experience that they have in high school band or whatever. And so they're doing it for the right reasons, but they don't always know what they're getting into. I felt as though I did. And that was right. I mean, there were challenges, but, my thing is when I have thought about doing something else, and it still crosses my mind from time to time, it's hard for me to identify what that would be. And so that always kind of takes me back to where I am, and that's as well, I'm already doing something that I do well, and there are days when I can be effective as a teacher and I don't have to prepare as much, whereas if I was doing something else I would have to prepare a whole lot. And then obviously there are days when I have to prepare a lot, but there's fun in that preparation too. Is there something in my life that has impacted my teaching? Okay. Well, I would say having a child. And granted, my son is turning 3, so I haven't had a lot of experience as a teacher and a father at the same time. But I think professionally what it's done is it's allowed me to relate to parents much better. And even leading up to having a child, parents would tell me, oh, it's going to change your life and this and that. And they were right, and I knew that. But that moment that you become a father, other parents, mothers and fathers, suddenly will feel like they can relate to you because you understand, at least on some level, what their emotions are related to their child. So if you as a teacher make a decision about their child, you can then base your experience as a parent on what the potential impacts might be emotionally. And sometimes you're making the best decision, the parent's going to be upset, but you have a greater understanding of that reason because you're a parent. So that's number one. I think number two, sort of from the student's perspective now, I feel like I can better empathize with the types of reactions that parents might have to positive and negative things from the student's perspective, and be able to take greater care on certain issues, pick and choose what's important, because that family relationship is something that I can relate to more. And I think just and then personally, it's really caused me to consider how I spend my time. It's really caused me to, well, quite frankly, to embrace what is a much less rigorous weekend and summer schedule that we have here at Elgin High School, and I know that was part of one of your other questions. I have a whole lot more time to my young family, for my young family than I did at Providence Catholic, and that's nothing on Providence Catholic. It's just they just did things differently. And so this job, even though it's a far commute, lends itself much better to being there for my family. And it's made that more of a priority, and it's made maybe some of the career goals that existed either less important, or it's redirected them into ways that are still achievable and important and of high value, but still also allow me to have a more of a balance in my life. Because I've known a lot of great band directors out there with horrible family situations, 2, 3, 4 marriages, kids in each one. Right. Kids that hate them, that kind of thing. And yet as educators, they are loved and respected and hugely successful. Very honestly, I would rather be a failure as an educator and a success as a parent than the other way around. Right. And so obviously I'm not trying to sacrifice myself as an educator. I'm trying to be successful both, but certainly it has caused me to strive for that greater balance and try to be better at life instead of just at being a teacher.
What's your favorite aspect of teaching?
I really enjoyed doing the musical. I don't know if I could call that an aspect. It's not a characteristic, but teaching band is sort of broken down. At least this job is, middle school and grade school sectionals. That's kind of the same every time you do it. 2 levels of concert band, each with uniqueness to it. Jazz band. I would say marching band has always been a strength, particularly because I don't really rely on anything but what I already know how to do to make that happen. And although it probably will get to a point where I'm going to need to find new ways of challenging myself with that. But I think that the way our leadership group is structured here and the way I think that'll be very possible. But I did enjoy the musical because it was something that I hadn't really done from that side of it. I've played in pits before. I've been involved in musicals, but I've not been that intricately involved. And it was just the right amount of involvement too, because I wasn't there, you know, months leading up to it. I had my practices with the pit, and then I wasn't there all the time until just the 2 weeks there. So it wasn't too much. And kids did a great job, and the other directors were great, and the musicians we hired were great. So that's definitely riding high on the list right now. Definitely something I'm looking forward to going forward. I'm pretty excited about the jazz band too, just because it seems to be catching hold, which I was concerned that it wasn't going to. So.
Right. All right. Yeah. Well, I think that's about all I have.
All right, then.
All right. Well, thank you.
Cheers.